And good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning, good morning. How are you? Hello, everybody. Hi, 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 hi. Hello, hello, hello. Hi. Good to see everybody. My name is Lisa Moser, and I'm right on the corner of Garfield and South Center Street. I had an opportunity to meet some of the participants at last night's meeting. It was an informative gathering put on by the ward counselor of 6. And let me tell you that the presentation mostly focused on the structural architecture of Ward 6. And that's a good thing. However, it was also attached to what apparently has been an application, and I say apparently because I did not get confirmation of this directly last night, but apparently, let me turn this up because I hope you can hear me. I've got plastic around my tripod because it's a bit cloudy out this morning. We've got a few rare breaks. I did need my umbrella earlier. You probably hear my vehicle running because I got in late and did not charge up my phone. And so I'm charging it from the car, and as soon as I can get a few bars on it, I will turn the vehicle off. Now, my name is Lisa Moser, and I want to tell you some of the things that we did in 2024 to bring us to here where we are in 2025 and half of the year, next month being June, almost here. So in December, we turned in a petition. It was an online Morningside petition. 600 residents signed this petition, and we did not get an official response to that petition. The closest that we got was a PR person from the school district saying that the building may be sold, and we're talking about Morningside. Last night, I again elaborated on the fact that this was a historical Freedmen community established in 1868. The Freedmen Bureau was very instrumental in orchestrating how this community was able to come about from Black people that had survived enslavement, some of them lifetime enslavement, and that the Morningside School was a part of the legacy of this Freedmen community. Now, if we were not in a very prominent historical city, probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. But when you have a preservation historical commission that has been very instrumental orchestrating the established and sustained 6 other historical districts, some explaining is due. Some explaining is due. You have the notion or the conversation or some of the phrases being thrown out that, well, we gotta raise some money. Well, are you telling me that the Preservation Historic Commission is only influential if you have your own money to establish a Black historic district? I counter that in saying that much of the funding that is ongoing is not seed money. That's preservation funding coming from foundations, coming from tax exemptions, coming from contributions that are also tax deductible. That means our tax dollars help provide the sustainability of 6 other historical districts. Now, my tone, I've heard, is a bit aggressive, and they don't like that. Well, you know, when I started 4 years ago advocating to bring about 6 historical sites so that we could bring in grant funding to establish a sustainable economic base that would not only be an education tool, not only save history, would be a part of the tourism that is so well promoted in the city of Statesville. So if we are going to have a Preservation Historic Commission, is there a byline in there somewhere that says if you don't have any seed money, no Black landmarks will be made possible? Because I'm not hearing answers. We're not hearing initiatives. Now, I'm not against anyone saying that we got to come up and we got to make some contributions. But what I am against is how we have for decades contributed to other historical districts, but yet they don't seem to feel a need to step up so we can expedite what's been missing in the whole story of Statesville's history. And I'm going to say this again. We have a Preservation Historic Commission. In 2023, they said we needed a task force. Well, the task force came about in 2024. They named it in 2024. And here we are in 2025. It's now a commission. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all for Black people having a cultural control over their history. We need that. But at this time, the commission, the African American Historical Commission, does not have the same policy rights, does not have the same access, does not have the same influence as Statesville's Preservation Historic Commission. I have a problem with that. We all should have a problem with that. They too should have a problem with that, because that is a direct definition of what discrimination or segregation looks like. That's what it looks like. We're missing economic advantages. We're missing economic investments. So if we have a Historical Preservation Commission and they know that they are overseeing 6 other historical districts being well sustained, and we give them the go-ahead that it's okay, we don't have to do anything for a Black historic district, a Black historic district that has 6 amazing historical landmarks. We have had a problem with this. So that's when last year in 2024, over the holiday, we had an online petition. And in that petition, it was specifically to show that Morningside is a legacy that belongs to this historical community. It is adjacent to the most significant historical landmark in all of our county for Black people's freedom, and that's the Green Street Cemetery. Hundreds of families buried there that survived enslavement. Some of them survived lifetime enslavement. World War I service members buried there. The Buffalo soldiers that served in the 1889 conflict buried there. So this legacy, now it would be different if Morningside was out in the county, but Morningside is right here in this community, within walking distance of downtown. I'm right on the corner of really what you can consider the front door of the Black Historic District, Garfield and South Green Street. Now, in the 1980s, and I thank Ms. Eleanor, thank you so much for submitting the application to make this church that was established in 1868 by those who had survived enslavement, many of them also buried in the Green Street Cemetery. Establish this. This is a national landmark. National landmark. So in good faith, we went to the Preservation Historic Commission. We went to City Council numerous times with the anticipation that here we have these other 6 sites that deserve recognition as well, and the funding. And so, to me, we're being played. That's my opinion, because all we're seeing is something being said, but nothing being written down. They said, okay, it's phase 1. Well, give me a description of phase 1. Where can I access the information? I requested an open information file. There was nothing about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. There was nothing about who was on the group when the architect, the state architect that first observed the Green Street Cemetery in 2022, the summer of 2022, we had no descendants that we know of that accompanied this group, and they won't tell us who was on this group. Transparency is a part of what we consider democracy. Are we going backwards even further because we're not seeing due process with something as basic as an observation to see what type of research will qualify for this Black burial ground, this early Black burial ground? The Preservation Historic Commission did not touch it as far as we can see. The city allowed the librarians to do the research. They called it a project. And most of the early data like non-traditional grave markers, when our enslaved family members that were surviving in the mid 1800s and early 1800s when they passed away. Non-traditional markers, sometimes a large rock, a few stones. It could even have been pottery. No pictures were taken. None of the data collected. Some of the librarians had never even heard of what a non-traditional marker was for a person that had survived enslavement. So that was data that could have been collected, but hey, it was just a project. Now, that's not the only data that we're missing. There's some known data that the GPR did turn up, and it's not being handed over. They even had the audacity to say in a public meeting in City Hall that they were not interested in a memorial. But last night at the community meeting for Ward 6, we were told that the plastic sign that they put in place was temporary. But nowhere do you see on any file data referencing a preservation plan and having a phase 1, having a phase 2, having a phase 3. So you can say one thing, but we all know if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. That's the same way it was for our ancestors, for our great-great-great-grandparents that survived the last decades of enslavement. Now, in this meeting, and I tell you, I learned a lot. There were some things about the structure in the neighborhood that I had not known. And that's all well and good. But how is it that without the descendants even having a chance to say again that we want these 6 applications for these 6 landmarks that we have presented as highly significant to be submitted for state recognition, but a state recognition application has been filed for the whole district with no budget, no projection of a budget. We were told, oh, we got to raise some money. But no one from the Preservation Historic Commission stood up. They know how to get the money. They've been responsible in overseeing millions of dollars, not a few thousand, not a few 100,000. I'm saying millions of dollars. That revitalization that was done for downtown, that was public funding. Much of the money that repeatedly goes to Ray Street and Mitchell College, those are historical districts. Public funding. You and I pay taxes, but you're telling me that because we can't come up with some seed money, that we can't have a landmark established and sustained. Make it make sense. We pay into taxes that support 6 other historical districts, but we can't, in 4 years, don't have a preservation plan. The last time I did a live was a few months ago, and I talked about how we are seeing development, and we do need housing, but keep in mind, preservation funding does not go to anything but heritage programs. And it is highly significant when we start talking about a sustainable historic district. It provides an economic resource for a community, for a city. So when you have 6 historical districts, and we were led initially to believe that these applications would be submitted, why would we not believe that? The Preservation Historic Commission is full of experts that have done this work for decades. They know how to bring in this funding better than we do. And I don't understand why they've not taken more initiative now that we've got local recognition in 2022. This is 2025. We got local recognition, and on that proclamation, it lists those historical districts and the significance of that. So there's a part missing here. You can't have a preservation commission for the city of Statesville overseeing millions of dollars for 6 historic districts, but have not made any initiative, any protocol, any type of new out-of-the-box thinking to bring about the 6 applications having a budget, having a preservation plan, having a phase 1, having a phase 2. Because you can say anything, but if it's not written down, am I right? If it's not written down, we don't exist. It is upsetting. It's upsetting because if we don't have due process on a local level, how easy is it for us not to have due process on a county level, on a state level, on a national level? And if you think that your American citizenship is not of value, then let me tell you that that's exactly what the 14th Amendment was all about. And we didn't get that right in the proclamation. You know, the end of enslavement laws and the beginning of American citizenship for black people, there's a little gap in there. The Emancipation Proclamation gave us freedom, American freedom, but it did not specify American citizenship. And let me take you back to before Emancipation Proclamation, because even if you gained your freedom early before Emancipation Proclamation, maybe you bought your family members out, maybe you worked off your own price and were able to gain your freedom, you as a black person here, you did not have citizenship. So our freedom, that's history, it's historical. And we have landmarks that reflect the great achievement possible with that citizenship. The 14th Amendment is what gave all black people American citizenship and in their freedom. So to not see 6 applications go in to recognize it, and why was it important that those 6 applications be submitted? Because once you have a national recognition, you can bring in funding, you can bring in grants, and we can bring in grants for the cemetery, we can bring in grants for a museum. The whole district, of course, needs to have block grants, but we can get started in a more systemic and more doable manner. We don't have to do it the way the other 6 historics did it. If that was possible, it would have been done already. And you have a right to be concerned, because we know that so much of the property that was once owned, so many of the businesses in the flats that were once ran by African Americans were redlined. And that's really not about discrimination. It's about economic discrimination. Okay? Economic discrimination. And this is what we're experiencing with the preservation funding not being made available and those applications for those 6 landmarks not being submitted. How am I supposed to say that calmly after saying it for 4 years? Tell me, how am I supposed to not see that this is a way to delay discrimination, postpone discrimination, deny discrimination, discredit discrimination, dismiss discrimination? How am I not supposed to be upset about that? I'm supposed to just be nice about that and let them skip over anything I said and just say what they want to say? Is that what we're going to do? We are not going to make sure that this is a movement that brings about change, that brings about protocols, that brings about building an economic base, one that we are certainly going to need, because if it wasn't needed, there wouldn't be 6 others in this historical city. There wouldn't be 6 other well-sustained economic historic districts if it wasn't a means of resources. And these are resources that we will need, because as AI, artificial intelligence, changes in a revolutionary way of economics, of business, this is something that we are not going to get an additional opportunity to do. The 6 historical sites that we're talking about in Ward 6 in this Black Historic District are endangered. Even in the presentation with the state officials that were so happy to share their application for the historical recognition of a district, and they admitted they didn't have any more money. There was no money for it. They said it was difficult for a historical district, but they did not say that that was so for significant landmarks. Landmarks. I'm not talking about giving money to somebody just because you have a house that was, a residence in 1880. That's the difference between a house that was occupied by a historical leader like Dr. Holliday and Mrs. Mary Colton Holliday. Dr. Holliday practiced medicine. He was our physician from 1906 until his death in 1966 when you could not go and be registered at the local hospital. You had to go to the Daisy House, the Negro Hospital, and Daisy Robinson, she's buried at the Green Street Cemetery. And you know what they did? They excavated the area where her grave is and covered over the broken head base that was possibly hers. And they made no record of where that base was. And this is the kind of respect that we're talking about. A preservation historic condition is okay for them to do. It's okay for them to not have a standard that would bring about sufficiency, that would bring about a model for other Black historic districts. We know it's not going to be easy, but it is possible, and it matters. It matters because if we cannot tell our story, we already don't know very much about what went on with our ancestors. They want to just say slaves, but these were families enslaved. When they went to Fort Dobbins and they had seed money, but don't forget they still have preservation money still coming in, they didn't have any idea of what it looked like. And I kind of had some, remorse, but I also understood the feeling of not knowing something as grand as that history, not knowing what Fort Dobbs looked like. Because I know that my ancestors that were living here in the 1700s, they were having lives. There were probably some of those that were enslaved that were leaders in the community of enslavement. We don't know. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they're buried in the 1700s. We don't know. So I could kind of relate to what it was like to not know what Fort Dobbs or Fort looked like. But guess what? They made an educational guess. They did some out-of-the-box thinking. They found a solution. They made resolutions. That's what we need. We need solutions, resolutions, and we need to come out of the box and find the means to get it done. They decided this is what French forts look like in the frontier. We're going to build it like this. The history, I think it was something like 27 settlers, 11 slaves. They didn't even say Black Africans or African Americans. They just said slaves, but we know mostly family enslaved. So when you find a way, you make a way when you want to make a way. And look at it today. And not everybody voted to have Fort Dobbs. There were some people against it. But the leaders of the community, you know what they did? They led. They made it possible. They came up with resolutions. And look at it today. It's known all across North Carolina. How is the Green Street Cemetery any different from that? How? Oh, we know how. But what we are seeing without a preservation plan, willy-nilly low-income housing, and I'm not against low-income housing. There needs to be an effort, a plan. But the authentic neighborhood, the Freedman community, it was a segregated community, but it was economically inclusive. The community, a Black community, economically inclusive. You had low-income housing, middle-income housing, and you had some upper-class housing. That's inclusive. A segregated community, but inclusive. All we see today, no preservation plan and low-income housing. How is that going to help us substantiate the economic value of a Black historic district? It's not. It's not. So we can find some solutions, but let's not lose the goal of elevating a historical community, allowing this willy-nilly, and I say that literally, willy-nilly low-income housing building. They're allowing it. And most of the recent development was done after 2022, after it was recognized locally as a historical district, knowing we didn't have a preservation plan. Oh, let's just go over here and build whatever we want. Okay, hopefully my phone is going to charge up. I didn't charge it last night. I was out late last night. I do have a tour on Sunday. I believe I have 2 vans. It is mostly a walking tour because all of the landmarks are in close proximity, but we don't want anyone to tire, and so we are going to start out in a van to go to our second stop, and then also the 4th stop, and of course anyone that needs assistance to come back to the original first stop, which is Depot Hill. We'll start out in Depot Hill. Why Depot Hill? Because Depot Hill is in the middle between the police depot train station, which is historical. Our ancestors came in, packed in cargo carts of the train. And of course, the first stop here in Statesville from Wilmington was at Depot Hill. And so it's not quite in sight distance, but it's close enough for us to feel the frequency of our ancestors. And then, of course, across the street is Mount Pleasant, the national historic landmark of Statesville's African American community. And then just a little ways past the church yard is the Flat, and that is the historical area where many of our businesses thrived in the 1940s and 50s, even dealing with the redlining. It was still a very substantial economic base. So we're speaking about a different type of economic base, but one that our ancestors that would want us to use, I'm sure, but not only that, our descendants would want us to get this done. It's important because we are not likely to get much more opportunity. Time is not on our side. We have no photographs of the Negro Hospital. We know where it was located. It's been built over, but it's still a very substantial historical site. We still have nothing at the land area. You can still kind of see an imprint of the Billingsley Academy, but there's nothing there. Of course, Morningside is being claimed by ownership of the county, but I have said over and over again, and I continue to say it, you cannot morally claim Morningside because it belongs to the freedmen community. You cannot ethically. If you have ethics, you will not claim Morningside because it belongs to the freedmen community. And I've gone through why that is, and it's well documented on how our early Negro schools came about, not just segregation, but just even establishment of public schools and how funding was withheld. So maybe if you give us back some of that funding from Morningside, we'll have some seed money. But either way, in 2022, the city mayor, and not just in front of me, there were others there that can tell you that this is the hard truth, said that when they hired the city grant writer, that the Black Historic District would be a priority. Ward 6 would be a priority. We had several meetings in 2022, 2023. We never saw the grant writer. He was off. He was he was taking a health break, not in his office. We never saw. I still haven't met him. And I've written about him and published about him. I still haven't met him. So anyway, I'm going to come back several times today at different spots. If you would like for me to come to your area and do a live and talk about the history, I would love to share with you who Reverend Wentz was, who was Mary Carlton Holliday, who was Dr. Holliday, who was Dr. Abernathy, who and all in the community still remember attending the original Morningside. I actually went to the wing branch that was an add-on in the 1940s for the elementary students. So it's an amazing history. You have several historical churches here. And so making sure that this history is ingrained in books. You know, that's another thing they said last night. The researchers for the state recognition, we couldn't find much written in the textbooks. And I'm like, yeah, we know. We know. And there were many pages that were torn out of the textbooks that we did get at Morningside. And I never remember seeing a new book as a textbook as a student at Morningside. Where's that money for our books? Where's that money for our teachers that didn't get full pay? Where's that money for a library that I still have trouble saying that word. It bothers me because I grew up saying it like that, so it's really hard. The library that was never built inside Morningside. So we have a lot to be thankful for our freedom, for our recognition of this historical district. People know about it, even at the state level, because we have made a point to petition 600 residents. It wasn't mentioned last night, but 600 residents signed their name to the Morningside petition and turned it in. It was turned in December 31st of 2024. And the only public acknowledgement was in the newspaper, and I believe it was the Charlotte Observer. They mentioned a district PR representative saying that the building was going to be sold. And I'm like, how can you sell something that it belongs to the community? How are you going to sell a legacy that belongs to a historical Black community representing the legacy of us being able to legally be educated, to legally learn to read and write? How are you going to sell what's ours? Well, you know, a lot of legal theft. Well, people want to tell me, well, they have the documentation and it's legal, but does that make it ethical? If you are about ethics, especially if you're in a county office seat, if you are about ethics, how can you condone the Morningside being taken from the community? It belongs to the community. It's adjacent to the Green Street Cemetery. How can you do it morally? Morally, knowing how we had to have our schools built on the cemetery grounds. Built on the cemetery grounds. How do you do that? Well, we managed. I remember playing on the Green Street Cemetery. I remember jumping over the headstones. Morningside belongs to the community. 600 residents signed that petition. We turned it into officials in the county. We turned it into officials in the city. We turned it into state of North Carolina offices. So they know. They know. It wasn't mentioned. It wasn't in a word, on an agenda. Nothing last night at the community meeting. But everyone wants to say that our expectations for this little bit should be enough. Well, it's not enough. If you've had residents and citizens saying that they want 6 historic district applications sent in, why are you going behind our back and turning in an application for the district? Who really wants that? Who really wants that? Now, it would be different if you came into the meeting and said, here's a state application for the recognition of all of this community. We're going to have block grants for these houses that are highly significant for the historical period, highly significant for the historical figures that live there, highly significant for an economic base for keeping the authenticness of the community. That would be different. Oh, but no, they came in and they were all excited. Oh, this building is this year, and it's significant for the early 1900s. We didn't get here in the early 1900s. We've been here since the 1700s. And the cemetery is what we know to be the earliest Black cemetery, with the pillars of our community, our historical figures buried there, our family members that survived enslavement. Morningside is across the street, and that street wasn't always paved. So if I can't say legally that it is part of the Green Street Cemetery, I can say legitimately it is adjacent. Morningside grounds are adjacent to the Green Street Cemetery. How are you going to make claim to that? Tell me that. And still say you are an ethical person, that you have ethics, that you have morals. How can you do that? Explain that to me. Explain it to me. Anyway. Cloud cover is starting to break. It's probably going to warm up a little bit. I probably will not need my umbrella later today, so I'm grateful for that. And I am grateful for anyone that speaks up, for whatever ideas and contributions that you have. This is a freedom of speech, and I don't believe that anyone should not be allowed freedom of speech. And we should all invite both sides. So the problem that I had last night is you knew that you had this presentation on the application for the entire district, but what about all of the descendants and the community members that have supported for the last 3.5 years to have 6 landmark sites with applications and were led to believe to some degree for several years that those applications would be filed? How about that? That's not due process. That's not showing us resolutions. And it certainly isn't the democratic order. You have one option and not the other when we have had so much support for this initial proposal in 2022, repeated in 2023, and brought up again in the media in 2024. That's right. That's right. So I am going to take a break. Please share the information that I do have a historical tour of the Black Historic District of Freedmen Community established in 1868 on Sunday. Sunday at 2 o'clock. I want you to bring your red umbrella, and hopefully I've got my red umbrella with me because we're going to need some shade. It's at 2 o'clock, and I'll take you through those 6 sites, and I'll tell you about the amazing history. And even though I probably have already told you so much of what I'm going to say, standing on the same ground. It's like whenever I come here to Mount Pleasant, I think about my great-grandmother. One of the pews actually has her surname in the little bronze plaque on the pew. When I have my 2 youngest grandchildren with me, I make sure that we sit on that pew. I tell them about how we are standing on family members that survived enslavement, and they were leaders and built this church, and it's an early church, and it's representative of our freedom. It's recognized nationally as a landmark. You know, it was only a couple of years ago that they actually started bringing the Christmas decorations this far down on South Center Street, and the community members had a lot to do with that, making that a expectation. And then making an expectation that they trim the trees, because these are public city trees. Making an expectation for them to trim them, because they were going without trim. And that doesn't happen at the privately owned buildings that make up downtown Statesville. We can win this. It's not going to be an easy win. May not come this year. But if we don't put the expectation in writing, we don't have that proposal in writing, we will never get past phase 0. Okay? So someone said phase 1, but I didn't see anything. I've looked through files, I've requested information, and I've not found anything that has a description of phase 1. So phase 1 does not exist. You can say it all day, but it means nothing if it's not written down. And it's even worse if it doesn't have a budget or a projected budget or resources or any sort of collaborative resolution proposed. So we've got to get it together, and we can't let a difference in opinions, not facts, because facts are facts, but we have to be together, because we can't let differences of opinion make us miss the main goal. And the main goal is that we establish an entity with public funding so that our history is saved, so that our historical district is sustained and brings about opportunities for business, for activities, for art, for the museum to be here. If we don't get this done, it won't be here. It's barely hanging on, and we're having trouble, we're having difficulty. So yes, I'm going to be talking about that as well as sharing the history. My name is Lisa Moser. I'm a community member. I'm a descendant, and I want you to be very vocal about your expectations and what it means to save Black history, and have this as a model. If you're interested, if you're not in Statesville and you're interested in how we're going about to get this done, I have written about it. I'll be glad to share that with you as well. So please show up on Sunday, 2 o'clock, Depot Hill on South Center Street. You'll see my truck. Okay, you'll see me. Okay, thank you so much. Have a good morning, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you so much.